A millionaire sits alone at an exclusive wedding for 3 hours. No one speaks to him because he's Asian and barely speaks English. The waitress who serves him is the only person who sees his loneliness, because she knows Mandarin and understands what it's like to be invisible. When she invites him to dance in his own language, the elite crowd mocks them both. She loses her job that night, but he remembers her courage. 6 months later, an envelope arrives at her door that will change everything. This story proves the most important connections happen when we see past what divides us. What city are you watching this video from and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. The party was being held in one of the most exclusive venues in Los Angeles, on the glass-enclosed terrace of the Waldorf Astoria, from where you could see the orange sky merge with the city lights. It was an elegant wedding, full of forced smiles, tailored suits, and expensive perfumes floating in the air. The orchestra played a jazz standard with technical precision, but without soul. Everyone was trying to seem happy. Everyone except one. At a round table, set apart from the center of the hall, sat a man who seemed to have been placed there like a protocol error. David Chen, Asian American, impassive face, dark suit without a single wrinkle, hands resting rigidly on his lap. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't look at anyone, just observed in silence, as if the world around him were a silent film he had already seen many times. Around him, the guests avoided even making eye contact. Some whispered about him without discretion. They say he's a millionaire, but he doesn't look like it. I heard he has tech, companies, or that he bought half of Santa Monica, but no one approached, and although the dance floor was beginning to fill with people moving, clumsily between laughter and drinks, he remained there motionless, as if he didn't know or didn't want to be part of it. He didn't understand a word of what they were saying, but he understood the gestures, the contained laughter, the looks that turned away. Discomfort needs no translation. Meanwhile, between trays and empty glasses, Emily walked with agility through the hall, dodging conversations that didn't belong to her. She was 24 years old, with attentive eyes and an expression that tried to remain neutral, although her thoughts rarely stayed quiet. She wore the staff uniform, white shirt, black vest, and a well-pressed apron. No one knew she spoke Mandarin. No one knew she had been an outstanding student at the state university before dropping out. At the wedding, she was just the Latina waitress in the corner, and she was used to being invisible. But that night, her attention stopped on David, not out of superficial curiosity, but because of something deeper, more human. There was a loneliness in him that felt familiar, a rigidity that wasn't born of pride, but of displacement. From her corner, she watched him take barely a sip of water, noticed how he struggled to maintain his composure, as if he were defending a silent dignity that no one there seemed to recognize. In his gaze there was no arrogance, but a subtle, ancient weariness. When their eyes met for an instant, Emily instinctively looked down, but she felt something. It wasn't a romantic connection or a lightning bolt of attraction. It was something else. As if in the middle of the party both knew they didn't completely belong in that place. That crossing of glances was brief, so brief that no one else noticed. But for the two of them, without knowing it yet, that night would not be like the others. Emily didn't usually get involved with the guests. She knew well what her place was. Go unnoticed, complete her shift, and return home before the exhaustion turned into sadness. But that night, while the toasts repeated with increasingly loud laughter, her gaze kept returning again and again to the corner, where David remained like a shadow, alone with his hands firm on his lap, eyes fixed on the center of the hall without moving an inch. Something inside her wouldn't let her ignore him. She had seen many lonely people at parties, drunks without company, ignored women, divorced uncles with lost looks. But this was different. It wasn't the loneliness of someone who had been excluded. It was that of someone who, although present, had never really been invited. Emily observed him for several minutes between trays of appetizers, talks about investments, and classist comments thrown like darts wrapped in courtesy. "That gentleman seems mute," said a woman in a red dress, smiling with malice. "Or he's waiting for someone to come worship him," her friend responded. "Or he simply doesn't want to mix with Americans," added a man, letting out a tense laugh. Emily felt those words tighten her chest. Not because of him exactly, It was because she had heard that tone so many times directed at people like her. People who worked serving, cleaning, caring, people who didn't matter. Meanwhile, David continued without reacting, but there was a slight tension in his shoulders, as if he understood more than he appeared to, as if each word touched him from afar, but touched him nonetheless. After half an hour, Emily approached his table with a tray of drinks. She didn't have to. Another waiter was in charge of that area, but something pushed her. She placed a new glass in front of him with smooth movements. She was about to turn around when she heard him say in a low voice, "Thank you." His accent was clumsy but understandable. Basic English, with effort. Emily looked at him surprised, and without thinking responded in Mandarin. "You're welcome. Don't worry about it." David lifted his head abruptly. His eyes opened barely, and for the first time all night something in his expression changed. A crack in the wall. "You speak Mandarin," he said slowly, still in his language. Emily nodded. "I studied it for 3 years. I really like your culture." He didn't respond immediately, but nodded with a slight bow that came from his soul. It was a brief, subtle gesture, but full of respect. Emily felt she had just crossed a line, an invisible one, not only with him, but with the entire party. She knew that if someone saw her talking to a guest, and less with that guest, the looks would come soon. But at that moment she didn't care. "Would you like anything else?" she asked now in English. David looked at her for a long second, then shook his head. "Just thank you for speaking," Emily nodded. She smiled barely, a shy smile, more for herself than for him, and walked back among the tables. No one had noticed anything yet, but something had changed. After that brief exchange, Emily continued working, as if nothing had happened. But her body didn't lie. Her steps were lighter, her breathing more alert. She felt a different energy in her chest, a mixture of adrenaline and doubt. Had she done wrong? Had she made him uncomfortable? Had anyone seen them? Actually, yes. Someone had seen them. Marcus, the hall manager, tall, dark-haired, with a dry voice and a face that seemed carved in annoyance, was watching her from near the bar. He was a man who didn't shout, but knew how to punish with a single phrase. And although he said nothing at that moment, his eyes followed Emily with a silent judgment she knew too well. Meanwhile, in his corner, David continued without moving much, but something in him had changed. Now his eyes didn't look at the hall with distance. They searched. Every so often, discreetly, they directed toward Emily when she passed between the tables. It wasn't desire, it wasn't romanticism, it was something simpler and rarer, gratitude. It was as if for the first time all night, maybe in many nights, someone had seen him as a person. The other guests remained the same, laughing loudly, dancing without rhythm, feigning naturalness between expensive drinks, but the murmur around David was beginning to become more acidic. What's that guy doing here? He doesn't dance or talk. They probably invited him out of obligation. Did you know he bought property in Malibu? How ridiculous to have so much money and not know how to behave. The criticism disguised itself as a joke, but Emily, who was passing nearby, felt the phrases like poorly wrapped daggers, and although she knew it wasn't her place to defend anyone, her stomach tightened with each word. That night, during dinner, Emily approached his table again. Not by protocol, but because something pushed her. She deposited in front of him a plate she wasn't supposed to carry. David looked at her gently. This time she said nothing, just looked at him for a second with a firm but serene expression, as if telling him, "Here you are not so alone." As she turned around, she heard the low voice of a woman behind her. "Did you see the waitress? What's she doing talking to him as if they were friends?" The words hit her harder than she wanted to admit, not out of shame, but out of helplessness. In that hall, she would never be seen as anything more than the one who serves, and yet she had just done something no one there had been able to do. Speak to him, listen to him. That night, while the DJ took control of the music and the lights became dimmer, Emily knew something was moving. Not in the hall, in her, and also in him. David lifted his gaze one last time toward the dance floor, where couples danced without inviting him, without even considering him, and at that moment their eyes crossed again. She, without thinking, sketched a gesture that seemed like a silent invitation, barely perceptible, almost unforgivable for someone like her in that context. He didn't move, but didn't look down. The balance of the party was starting to tilt, and no one knew it yet. The music changed. The DJ replaced the jazz standards with a soft instrumental version of a romantic classic. The dance floor cleared a bit, giving way to older couples who embraced with slow, ceremonial movements. It was the most emotional moment of the night. Photos contained laughter, tepid applause. Emily kept working, but her mind was elsewhere. David hadn't moved since he arrived. He had been sitting for more than 3 hours observing a world that didn't want him there. No one had spoken to him. No one had invited him to dance. And yet, he remained with his back straight, as if he didn't need any of that. As if he silently endured the discomfort of being different, foreign, alone. But she couldn't take it anymore. With her heart beating hard in her chest and her throat closed, Emily approached his table once more. This time without a tray, without excuses, just her in front of him. David looked at her with a mixture of surprise and relief, and then she spoke in Mandarin with a trembling but determined voice. "Would you like to dance with me?" The silence was immediate. They hadn't even raised their voices. But something in the atmosphere seemed to stop. He looked at her fixedly, as if doubting he had understood correctly. "Now?" he asked without moving. Emily nodded. She didn't know why she was doing it. She wasn't seeking to impress. It wasn't an act of rebellion. She just felt that no one else would do it, and that leaving him there alone would be to continue allowing a small but cruel injustice. David hesitated. His hands trembled barely, but he stood up. The steps toward the dance floor were slow, careful. No one noticed them at first, but when they reached the edge of the circle of dancers, the looks began to turn. A waitress and the Asian millionaire dancing. The music continued, but the conversations began to fade little by little, as if something didn't fit in the perfect picture of that night. Emily didn't dance like a professional, but her steps were sincere. She looked David in the eyes with a tenderness that sought nothing in return. David, for his part, moved his feet clumsily, but with dignity. They didn't dance well, but they danced. And for an instant, a brief, fragile, beautiful one, it seemed the world accepted them. People looked at them, yes, but without speaking, some with astonishment, others with a kind of respectful curiosity. There was something poetic in that scene. Even the DJ, without knowing why, kept the song going a few more seconds. Emily smiled. David too, barely. It was the first time that night, and for an instant she believed everything would be okay, that this small act was enough to break the distance, that the barrier between them and us could be broken with a single dance. But then a laugh broke the air. "What is this? A circus act?" said someone near the bar, another louder voice. "Look at that, the waitress and the millionaire. All that's missing is for her to kiss him to earn the tip." And then, like a spark on gasoline, the murmurs turned into whispers. The laughter grew, the looks became hard, not from everyone, but from enough. Emily felt the blow, not physical, but internal. A lash of shame that rose up her back and burned her face. David stopped the movement, looked at her. There was something different in his eyes. Now it wasn't anger. It was a kind of silent disappointment, not toward her, toward the world. Emily looked down, took a step back. "I'm sorry," she murmured now in English, and left. She walked quickly toward the kitchen, ignoring the voices, ignoring her boss's orders, who was already approaching with a furrowed brow. She needed to disappear. At that instant she wished she hadn't done anything. False victory. False moment. The party continued, but something had broken, and David sat back down. Alone again. The kitchen was small, hot, and full of noise, but at that moment for Emily it was a refuge. She rested her hands on the steel table and lowered her head. The sweat on her forehead mixed with shame. She was breathing heavily as if she had run miles. Her heart was beating in her ears. She wanted to disappear. What did I do? She thought. What was I thinking? Not even 2 minutes passed before Marcus entered furiously, without shouting, but with a look sharp as a knife. Can you explain to me what that was? He said in a low voice, but with a fury that could be felt on the skin. Emily tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. Do you know how that makes us look in front of the client? In front of the event owners, dancing with a guest? With the weirdest one besides. She looked at him without defending herself. She had no way to explain what she had felt. She had no words to justify something that to everyone else seemed like foolishness. Go home now. I'll handle closing your shift. But there are still 2 hours left. It doesn't matter. Leave. The phrase was a sentence. Without more, Emily hung up her apron, picked up her bag, and left through the back door. On the street, the city was still alive. Cars, distant laughter, music from other bars. But for her, everything sounded muted. She walked through the empty streets with heavy steps. Her eyes were moist, but she wasn't crying. It was a mixture of rage, sadness, and that bitter feeling of having done the right thing in the wrong place. That night, upon arriving at her small apartment in East LA, her mother was sleeping on the sofa with the television on low volume. Emily didn't wake her. She locked herself in her room, sat on the bed, and let her head fall between her hands. She thought about leaving everything, about never working weddings again, about forgetting languages, Mandarin, dreams. On the other side of the city, in a silent hotel room, David Chen looked out the window from the 15th floor. He saw the lights of Los Angeles as if they were another galaxy. He hadn't turned on the light. He wasn't hungry. He only had one fixed image in his mind, that of Emily, stretching her hand toward him in the middle of the dance floor. That instant so brief, so clean, and what came after. He didn't fully understand the words they had said, but he had understood the faces, the laughter, the contempt, and worst of all, he had seen how she, the only person who had shown him humanity, was punished for it. David closed his eyes, thought about his country, about his distant family, about the years of cold negotiations, about all the places where he had been well received for his money, but never for his person, and for the first time in a long time he felt deeply alone. That night neither of them slept, and the world kept turning, indifferent to the hearts that were breaking in silence. The next morning dawned gray, with low clouds and a sticky heat that announced a storm. Emily hadn't slept. She had barely moved from the bed, her gaze fixed on the ceiling, replaying what had happened over and over again, on her cell phone. No messages, no calls, just the silence that usually follows a public humiliation. Past noon, she forced herself to get up, washed her face, made coffee, helped her mother with her medications, did everything automatically, with a feigned calm that only hid the emptiness. She went to the market. She walked with her head down. In her neighborhood, no one knew what had happened, but she felt the weight of each step, as if everyone was looking at her. Upon returning, she found something at the door, an envelope. It had no return address, only her name written by hand. Inside, a simple white card with a single phrase in imperfect English. Thank you for seeing me. I want to understand. Can I invite you for tea? Teach and Emily felt her chest tighten. The handwriting was clumsy but firm. There was something deeply human in that gesture. It wasn't insistent, it wasn't condescending. It was a question from loneliness, a barely open door. She didn't know how he had gotten her address, but something told her there was no danger, that there was sincerity. She hesitated for hours until she responded by email with a simple phrase. Yes, but first I need you to understand something. That same afternoon, they met in a discreet cafe in downtown Los Angeles, far from the party halls, from the suits, from the murmurs. David was already there when she arrived, with a notebook on the table and an electronic dictionary beside it. He stood up when he saw her and made a slight bow. Emily didn't smile but sat in front of him. She looked him in the eyes. They didn't humiliate me just for dancing with you, she said in Mandarin. They humiliated me because they don't accept that someone like me dares to do something outside of my place. David listened in silence. Then she took a folded sheet from her bag. It was an old certificate, wrinkled but still legible. Certificate of Competence in Mandarin language, advanced intermediate level. I got this 4 years ago. I studied at the state university. I was on scholarship. I wanted to be a translator. David frowned slightly, confused. And why? My mother got sick. There was no money. There was no time. I left everything, worked a bit of everything. Now I clean houses, serve at weddings, and try not to dream too much. But sometimes I still understand words that no one expects me to understand. David lowered his gaze, pressed his lips. Emily continued with a firm voice. I don't want you to think it was out of pity. I invited you to dance because I also know what it's like to be sitting at a table where no one talks to you. Because not having power doesn't mean not having dignity. David looked at her with another expression, a mixture of deep respect and shock. Something was breaking inside him, and it showed. In America, he said with difficulty, there are also silences that weigh, but I didn't know they hurt the same here. Then from the inside pocket of his jacket, David took out a sheet folded in 4, slid it toward her. Emily opened it. It was a letter signed by a director of an international foundation. Mr. David Chen is an active member of the Foundation for Cultural Exchange and Training of Young Translators. He is currently seeking talent in North America to integrate scholarship and professional training programs in Asia. Emily didn't understand. She looked at him. David nodded slowly. I didn't say it at the party. I didn't want to seem like the savior. I'm also afraid of not being seen as a person. But you are already a translator. You just need someone to remember it. Emily squeezed the letter between her fingers. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know what to say. That day, in that cafe without luxuries, a silent revelation occurred. She was never invisible. She was just in a place that insisted on not looking, and someone had finally seen. In the following days, Emily's life was divided in 2 halves. The outside world, where she continued fulfilling shifts, carrying trays and caring for her mother, and the secret world in which, without knowing how, she had begun to recover parts of herself she thought were lost. David kept his word. He didn't offer her a miracle or an instant way out, but he connected her with a distance learning program from the foundation, sent her books, materials, and put her in contact with an Asian mentor. Everything was still informal, without written promises. But for the first time, someone was opening a door without asking her to bend down to pass through. Emily studied at night while her mother slept. She returned to practicing writing, reading, grammar. She was afraid of getting her hopes up again, but she couldn't help it. However, what happens in silence sooner or later reaches the noise. One afternoon, while picking up glasses at a minor event, Marcus approached her with a cold expression. So, now you think you're important? She looked at him confused. They told me you're talking to the Asian guy again, that he's looking for you. What is this? A movie story? Emily didn't respond. Marcus smiled cynically. Look, I'm telling you for your own good. People like you don't end well when they play at changing leagues, and if you continue with those fantasies, you won't last long here. The threat wasn't direct, but it was clear. That night, Emily walked to the hotel where she knew David was still staying. She hesitated to go up, hesitated to knock, but she did. David received her with the same calm as always. He was reading without a tie, without appearances. Seeing her nervous, he set the book aside. Everything okay? She sat in front of him. She didn't smile. Why are you doing this? She asked, almost in a whisper. David didn't respond immediately. Because I saw in you something that cannot be ignored. And what did you see? He looked at her fixedly. Someone who doesn't ask permission to do the right thing. Someone who has already gotten up many times without help. Emily looked down. She didn't want to cry, but she was tired. Very tired. I'm nobody, David. I didn't even finish university. I'm not even good at serving drinks. My boss hates me. My coworkers see me as if I were crazy. You could have helped anyone. Why me? David responded with a soft voice, almost paternal. Because you were the only person who approached, without expecting anything in return. There was a long silence, and then, without raising his voice, David said, The foundation accepted to include your case as an exception. If you decide, you can travel in 6 months. The program covers everything, but you have to prepare. You have to study seriously again. This is not a gift, it's a bet. Emily felt as if the ground was moving beneath her feet. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a compliment. It was a real responsibility. She left the hotel with a mixture of euphoria and fear, as if she had just been born another version of herself, and didn't yet know if she could sustain it, but she could no longer go back. That night, for the first time in a long time, she sat in front of her mother and told her everything. Her mother didn't say much, just looked at her with eyes full of silent pride and took her hand. "Fly, my daughter," she whispered. "Just don't forget where you came from." Emily nodded, holding back tears. She was no longer just a waitress who spoke Mandarin. She was a woman who had resisted being invisible, and that was finally having real consequences. 6 months passed. The city remained the same noises, the same familiar faces in the neighborhood, the same aisles in the supermarkets where Emily still crossed paths with the lady who always asked about discounts. But she was not the same. She had left the events job with a brief farewell, without tears or scandals, just a clear phrase directed at Marcus before leaving. "Thank you for reminding me what I never want to be again." Her days had transformed. She got up early to study with a discipline that seemed impossible in the Emily of months ago. In the afternoon, she gave basic Mandarin classes to children in a community library. She didn't charge. It was her way of staying alive between the language and others. David returned to Asia 2 weeks after the final meeting. They said goodbye without drama, just a long, sincere handshake, and a last phrase in Mandarin said with contained emotion. Sometimes the most important encounters don't need to last long. Since then, they wrote occasionally. He sent her materials, corrections, advice. She sent him recordings with her progress. Neither spoke of the dance. Neither mentioned the party, as if both understood that it had already fulfilled its role. The day of her departure, Emily took only one suitcase. She was leaving behind little materially, but much emotionally. Her mother accompanied her to the airport, hugging her tightly, without showing tears. "You're not running away, daughter," she told her. "You're returning to yourself." The flight was long, but not heavy. During the hours in the air, Emily reviewed everything she had lived. She remembered the mocking look, the cold in her back when running off the dance floor, the night studying with dry eyes from exhaustion, and above all, that initial gesture, her decision to approach a lonely man without expecting anything in return. That was the crack through which the light entered. A year later, a photograph began to circulate on a small foundation blog in Asia. It showed a group of young translators in training smiling in front of an old bookstore in Tokyo. Among them stood out a Latina woman, with firm eyes and a serene expression. Emily wasn't wearing makeup, wasn't posing, just smiling with honesty. In Los Angeles, no one made a scandal. There were no headlines or public recognitions. But in the hall where it all began, a new events company had replaced the previous one, and among the new policies was a very particular one. All staff will be treated with respect. Inclusion is promoted. Offensive comments will not be tolerated. No one knew where that clause had come from. But the old employees remembered, and a new young waiter, seeing the group photo on a computer screen, asked with curiosity, "And who is she?" A former coworker smiled without looking at the screen. "That's a woman who danced with dignity in a place where no one danced with her, and that changed everything."